The woman with the clipboard didn't even look up at me when she said it. She just glanced at her list, then up at the chandeliers, then back at the list, and said, "I don't see your name here, ma'am. Are you sure you're at the right venue?" I told her my name. "Are you sure you're at the right venue?" I told her I was the groom's mother. I said it twice, because the first time my voice came out smaller than I meant it to. That's when my daughter-in-law turned around. She'd been laughing with one of her bridesmaids by the cocktail table, holding a glass of champagne. The light from the foyer caught the rhinestones on her sash, bride-to-be, and she walked over slow, the way someone walks when they've been waiting for a moment to arrive. She tilted her head at me and said, loud enough for the bridesmaids to hear, "Oh, Helen," I told the girl at the door. "Your name isn't on the list." She smiled, not a polite smile. The kind of smile a child gives when they've just stepped on an ant on purpose. I'm 68 years old. I've buried a husband. I've worked 31 years as a hospital billing supervisor in Toledo. I've sat through chemotherapy infusions holding my sister's hand while she threw up into a kidney-shaped bowl. I have not, in all those years, ever felt as small as I felt standing on that polished marble floor in my navy blue dress and my one good string of pearls, holding a wrapped gift in both hands like a schoolgirl. I looked past her, into the ballroom, hoping I'd see my son. I wanted Mark to come walking out, looking confused, saying, "Mom, what's going on? Of course you're invited." I waited maybe 10 seconds. It felt like 10 minutes. He didn't come. The girl with the clipboard cleared her throat. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. I think she felt sorry for me, which somehow made it worse. I said, "I'd like to speak to my son." My daughter-in-law, her name is Brittany, said, "He's getting ready. This is the rehearsal dinner, Helen. It's invitation only. We talked about this. We had not talked about this. We had not talked about this. We had never talked about this." I had a printed itinerary in my purse that Mark himself had handed me 3 weeks ago over coffee at the Panera off Monroe Street. I had it in a manila envelope with the tickets for my lift and a little card that said, "Mames," a little card that said, "Mom, see you Friday at 6. Love you." The itinerary said rehearsal dinner, the Grand Pavilion at Maumee Bay, 6 p.m., black tie optional. I almost pulled it out. I almost stood there in the foyer with 30 other guests watching, and I almost made the case for myself to a 34-year-old woman in a white sash who was looking at me like I was a stain on her napkin. I didn't. I'm proud of that, even now. I just nodded once. I said, "I see," and I turned around and walked back through those big glass doors and across the parking lot to my car. It was a long parking lot, the kind with little flags on poles. I remember thinking, "Don't cry yet. Get to the car first. You've got that far at least." I made it. I sat down behind the wheel of my 11-year-old Buick and I put my hands on the steering wheel and I waited for tears that didn't come. I think I was past tears. I think I'd walked right through the country of tears and come out somewhere else. I sat there for a long time. The gift was on the passenger seat. It was a Waterford crystal vase I had bought on layaway over 4 months from the department store at Franklin Park Mall. It had cost me $352. I remember the exact number because I had to break it into 4 payments of $88, and I'd circled the dates on my kitchen calendar. I drove home. I did not cry on the highway. I drove the speed limit. I noticed every billboard. I noticed a Cracker Barrel exit and thought about how my husband, Glenn, used to insist on stopping at every Cracker Barrel between Toledo and Cleveland just to look at the rocking chairs even though we never bought one. I noticed that the sun was setting behind the cooling towers of the power plant. I noticed I was extremely calm in a way that wasn't normal calm. It was the calm of something inside me having gone quiet because it was finally listening. By the time I pulled into my driveway on Indianwood Boulevard, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Let me back up. I have to back up, or none of this makes sense. My son is 41 years old. His name is Mark. He's my only child. His father, Glenn, died of a heart attack at the breakfast table when Mark was 26. Glenn was 55. He was eating a piece of wheat toast with peanut butter on it. He looked surprised. That's the part I can't shake, even all these years later. He looked surprised, like he couldn't believe his own body would do that to him. After Glenn died, It was just me and Mark. He'd already moved out, but he came home every Sunday for years. I held that boy together. I held myself together for him. I kept the house. I kept up Glenn's life insurance paperwork. I kept Mark in the conversation about money even when he didn't want to be in it. Mark was married before. Her name was Karen. She was a kindergarten teacher and she was lovely. They divorced 6 years ago. No kids. Karen called me to tell me, not Mark. She cried. I cried. We still send each other Christmas cards. Brittany came along about 2 years after the divorce. Mark met her at a wine bar in Perrysburg. She was 29 then. He was 36. I knew right away. I knew the way mothers know. I knew it in the way she looked at the inside of my house instead of at me when Mark first brought her to dinner. She was looking at the cabinetry. She was looking at the gamut. She was assessing. I tried, though. God, I tried. I had her over for brunch. I gave her my mother's recipe for sour cream coffee cake. I asked about her family. She's from Naperville. Her father is some kind of investor. Her mother is on 3 boards. I asked about her job. She's in pharmaceutical sales. I tried to find one thing we had in common. I would have settled for one. We didn't have one. She made little jabs from the start. Helen, this casserole is so nostalgic. Helen, I love how you haven't updated the kitchen. It's so you. Helen, Mark says you used to work for a hospital. That must have been so steady. The way she said the word steady, like it was a polite way of saying boring, Mark didn't notice, or he pretended not to notice. Boys can do that, even 41-year-old boys. They can sit at a table and not hear what's happening because hearing it would mean choosing. Now, the money. Because the comments people leave on stories like mine, and I've read enough of them to know, always ask about the money. Why was the mother paying for anything in the first place? Let me tell you. After Glenn died, his life insurance was substantial. Glenn had been an actuary of all things. He calculated risk for a living, and he had not been about to leave his wife and son uncovered. The policy paid out $480,000. I put $250 into a brokerage account, paid off the mortgage, and put $120,000 into a separate account for Mark, which I told him was for a down payment on a house someday. Mark used that money in 2019 to put 20% down on a 5-bedroom in Sylvania. He and Karen had picked the house together. Then Karen left, and Mark kept the house. And Mark also lost his job for 9 months in 2020, and during those 9 months I covered his property taxes, his HOA dues, and 3 of his mortgage payments. We never wrote it down. I never asked him for $1 back. I made a quiet decision in my own heart that it was a gift. I told myself, this is what Glenn would have done. This is the house Glenn would have wanted his boy to keep. Then came Brittany. And then came the engagement, which Mark announced over Easter dinner 2 years ago. And then came the wedding planning. And the wedding planning is where I should have known. Brittany wanted what she called a destination quality experience close to home. The Grand Pavilion at Maumee Bay was her compromise. She'd wanted Lake Geneva. But Mark talked her down. The total budget she presented at our family meeting was $148,000. Mark's salary is around $95,000. He's a regional sales manager for an HVAC supply company. He had not yet recovered, financially, from 2020. He had no savings to speak of. Brittany had a lot of opinions about what the wedding should be, and very few opinions about how it would be paid for. I sat at my kitchen table with Mark in February of last year. He'd come over alone. He looked tired. He asked if I would consider helping with the wedding. He didn't ask for a number. He said anything would help, Mom. We'll figure out the rest. I'm going to be honest with you because there's no point in lying now. I wrote a check that night for $40,000. I wrote another one 2 months later for $35,000 to cover the venue deposit and the catering when Brittany decided the chef she wanted required a 50% deposit up front. I paid for the photographer in full. $16,000 to a woman in Ann Arbor whose Instagram I had to be sent a link to. I paid for the band. I paid for the honeymoon, which was 8 nights at a resort in St. Lucia with a butler service Brittany had screenshots of on her phone. I paid because Mark asked me to. I paid because Glenn would have. I paid because I had the money and I love my son. I paid because somewhere deep down I thought, if I am part of this, I will be part of this. If I write the checks, they cannot make me invisible. I added it up later, sitting at the same kitchen table, with a yellow legal pad and the same kind of cheap Bic pen I've used since I was at the hospital. The total came to $400. I had not made any of these payments contingent on anything. I had no contract. I had nothing in writing. I had only the canceled checks and the receipts, and a folder in my filing cabinet labeled Mark's wedding in my own handwriting. That's the part the woman with the clipboard didn't know. That's the part Brittany had apparently forgotten, or perhaps had never quite registered, when she stood there in her sash and laughed at me in front of 2 bridesmaids and a hired event coordinator. My name wasn't on the list, but my name was on every single invoice. I want to tell you what I did when I got home because this is the part of the story that I need to get exactly right. I did not call Mark. I did not call my sister. I did not call anyone that night. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I sat at the kitchen table and I opened the folder labeled Mark's wedding. I went through every receipt. I made a list, by hand, on the same yellow legal pad. Vendor name, date of payment, amount paid, balance owed. The wedding wasn't until Saturday afternoon. The dinner where I'd been turned away was Friday night. The rehearsal dinner. There were still vendor balances scheduled to clear my account on Saturday morning. The final balance to the venue, the remainder owed to the band, the bar service, the florist. By my count, there was still about $22,000 in payments scheduled to leave my account between Saturday morning and the following Tuesday. That did not include the honeymoon balance of $11,400, which would clear when they checked into the resort. I closed the folder. I went to bed. I slept 4 hours and woke up at 4 in the morning, the way you do when something inside you has decided what to do without consulting you. At 6, I called the venue's emergency line. Spoke to the night manager, a man named Doug. I was polite. I explained that I, the cardholder of record, was withdrawing authorization for any further charges to my visa from the Grand Pavilion. I said this in the voice I used to use when I'd worked the billing department at St. Vincent's. Calm, specific, not raising my voice once. I asked him to confirm the cancellation in an email. He did. I told him I understood that any deposits already paid were forfeit. I told him I understood that fines and rescheduling fees would apply. I told him that was acceptable. I did the same thing with the band. I called the office of the booking agency in Detroit, left a voicemail, then sent a follow-up email at 7:14 a.m. I did the same thing with the bar service. I did the same thing with the limousines. I did not cancel the photographer because she'd been paid in full and I figured the woman shouldn't suffer for somebody else's behavior, and I told her in a separate email that she was welcome to keep her fee whether or not she ended up shooting anything. She wrote back 2 hours later and said she'd photographed the venue setup at no extra charge so I'd have something to remember the day by, which I thought was kind of her, given everything. I called the resort in St. Lucia at 7:30. I canceled the honeymoon. The cancellation fee was 60% of the total. I paid it. I did not request a refund of the deposit because I knew there wouldn't be one. I did not call my son. By 8:30 in the morning on Saturday, I'd unwound roughly $33,000 in pending and committed wedding-related payments. I had absorbed about $19,000 in losses on deposits and cancellation fees. I considered that a fair price for what I was about to learn about myself. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia. She's been doing my legal work since Glenn died. I told her I needed her to draft 2 letters. The first was a notice that any future financial support to my son was being terminated, effective immediately. The second was a request to schedule a meeting to revise my will and the structure of a small trust I had set up for any future grandchildren. She asked me, quietly, if I was all right. I said, I am extremely all right, Patricia. I am the most all right I have been in years. She said, Helen, that's not the same thing. I told her I knew it wasn't. I told her I'd think about that distinction later. Right now I needed the letters. She had them ready by Monday. The first phone call from Mark came at 11:47 a.m. on Saturday. I let it go to voicemail. The next came 8 minutes later. Then a text. Then another call. then a text from Brittany in all caps that I deleted without reading the whole thing because the first 3 words were, "What the hell?" By 3 in the afternoon, which was about when guests would have been arriving for a wedding ceremony that, as it turned out, no longer had a venue, a band, or a bar, I had received 28 calls and 40-some texts. I sat in my living room. I did not pick up. I watched a documentary on PBS about the migration patterns of sandhill cranes. I drank a glass of cold white wine, which I almost never do in the daytime, and I watched those long-legged birds rise up off a riverbank in Nebraska in their thousands, and I cried for the first time. Not for my son, not for my daughter-in-law. I cried for the woman I had been at the foyer the night before, holding a Waterford vase like an offering, asking permission to attend her own son's wedding. I cried for her because she was gone, and because I missed her, and because I was glad she was gone. The doorbell rang at 6:45. It was Mark. He was still wearing the suit. The boutonniere was crushed. His eyes were red and his hair was a mess. I let him in. I made him sit at the kitchen table where his father used to sit. I made him a cup of coffee. He said, Mom, what did you do?" I said, "I canceled the things I have been paying for. That's what I did." He said, "There were 200 people there, Mom. There were 200 people. The venue locked us out. The food never came. The band. Mom, she is destroyed." I said, "Do you remember what your wife said to me last night?" He looked at the table. I said, "Look at me, Mark." He looked at me. "He's got Glenn's eyes. He's always had Glenn's eyes. He's always had Glenn's eyes." I said, "Do you remember what your wife said to me last night?" He said quietly, "She told me she'd had a misunderstanding with the venue staff." I said, "She laughed at me, Mark. She told me my name wasn't on the list, in front of strangers." While I stood there with a $350 gift in my hands and a printout of the invitation your hand wrote for me, he started to cry. He cried like he was 12 again and had broken a window with a baseball. I let him. I didn't comfort him. I sat across the table and I let my 41-year-old son cry, and I waited. When he was finished, he said, "I didn't know, Mom. I swear to God, I would have." I said, "You would have what, Mark?" He didn't have an answer. I said, "She has been talking to you about me for 2 years. I've heard the way she steers things at dinner. I've heard the way she says my name. I'm not blaming you for her. I'm telling you that you have been listening, even when you thought you weren't. And last night, when she stood there at the door, you weren't there to walk her back from it. So I walked myself back from it instead." He said, "Mom, please, what am I supposed to do?" I said, "That's not my question to answer anymore." We sat there a while. The clock on the microwave ticked over. He drank his coffee. He had the same way of holding a coffee cup as his father, 2 hands wrapped around it like he was warming them at a fire. He said, "She'll never forgive me." I said, "Mark, listen to me carefully. I am not asking you to choose between us. I never would. That isn't what I'm doing. What I'm telling you is that I'm done paying. I'm done paying with my checkbook, and I'm done paying with my dignity. The two have been the same thing for too long. If you want a relationship with me from here forward, you'll have it. But it will be a relationship between 2 adults, not between a mother and a wallet. Do you understand me?" He nodded. He couldn't speak. I said, "Now go home to your wife. Don't tell her I said this because she won't hear it from me. But she made a decision last night about who I was to her. That decision had a price. I'm not going to be the one to absorb that price anymore. She will." He left around 9. He hugged me at the door for a long time. He smelled like cologne and wedding flowers. He said, "I love you, Mom." I said, "I love you too, son. Drive carefully." I closed the door. I locked it. I stood in the hallway for a minute with my hand on the wood. Then I went to bed. The fallout took about 3 months to settle. Brittany did not, in fact, marry my son the next weekend. They postponed. Then they postponed again. They postponed again. The deposits I had forfeited could not be recovered, but most of the vendors agreed to apply credits toward a smaller event later, a thing Brittany apparently could not stomach the idea of, because her vision of the wedding had been very specific, and the smaller version was, in her words to a bridesmaid who later became my unlikely ally, embarrassing. The bridesmaid's name is Denise. She called me about 6 weeks after the non-wedding. She'd been at the foyer that night. She'd seen what happened. She told me she had been thinking about it ever since, and she just wanted me to know that she told Brittany the next morning that what she did to me was unforgivable, and that Brittany had laughed at her too. They were no longer friends. Mark and Brittany are still married. They did get married, in the end, at the Lucas County Courthouse in November, with 2 witnesses and no reception. I was not invited. I was not expecting to be. Mark sent me a photograph after the fact. I framed it. I keep it on the bookshelf next to Glenn's. I have not seen Brittany since the foyer. I don't expect I will. Mark and I have dinner once a month at a diner on Reynolds Road. He pays. He insists on it. We talk about his work and about the Tigers and about the renovations he is finally doing on the Sylvania house, using his own money, which he is borrowing from his bank like a grown man. He apologized again, last month, for the wedding. He brought it up himself. He said, "Mom, I should have walked you in." I said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "I'm working on it. I'm in counseling." I said, "Good, that's good, Mark." I didn't tell him I'm proud of him. I'm saving that. He hasn't earned it back yet, and that's not a punishment. It's just true. He knows it. He's working with it. That's what adult sons do when they finally start to. I want to tell you about the trust, because I know if you've stayed with me this long, you're wondering. I did not, in the end, leave Mark out of my will. I came close. Patricia drafted the version where I did, and I sat with it for 2 weeks, and then I asked her to draft another version. In the new version, my house and my brokerage account go to Mark, but in trust, distributed over 15 years, with an independent trustee who is a friend of Patricia's, a retired judge named Gloria. Brittany cannot access any of it. If they divorce, it becomes Mark's outright. If Mark predeceases me, it goes to a hospital foundation that Glenn supported. I made one more change. I had put aside $100,000 years ago for any future grandchild. I kept that money, but I restructured it as an educational trust managed by Gloria, with strict guidelines, only payable for tuition and books and medical expenses. Not for weddings, not for means not for honeymoons. The grandchild, if and when one arrives, will know it was set up by their grandmother. They will know it has rules. They will know that love can be generous and still have shape to it. I learned that the hard way, and I'm not going to let any child of my child grow up not knowing it. I told Mark all of this over coffee. He listened. He nodded. He said, "That's fair, Mom. That's more than fair." I said, "I know it is. I'm 68 years old. I started painting last spring. There's a community center in West Toledo that does watercolor on Tuesdays for $10 a session. I am not very good. I am getting less bad. I painted the cooling towers I'd seen on the drive home that night, those big concrete towers with the steam coming off the top, and I gave it to my sister, and she put it on her refrigerator like I was 8 years old, and I cried a little when I saw it there. I take Glenn's old fishing trips up to Lake Erie now by myself. I bought a pair of waders. I am terrible at fishing. I caught a perch in June that was the size of my hand, and I let it go because I felt sorry for it. I drove past the Grand Pavilion at Maumee Bay last weekend. On the way back from the lake, I didn't slow down. I didn't speed up. I just drove past it. It was a building. It wasn't anything else. The thing that had happened there had happened to a different woman in a different life. And she had walked out of it and into this one. And she was fine. I am fine. If you were sitting somewhere right now and someone in your family is teaching you that you do not matter, I want you to hear me. I want you to listen to a woman who learned this late and at a price. You do not have to be on anyone's list. You do not have to pay to be invited to your own life. The day you stop paying is the day you find out who actually wanted you there. My name is on every list that matters now. I wrote them myself. I think about that foyer a lot, even now. The polished marble, the chandeliers, the way I stood there with the Waterford vase in my hands and waited for my son to come find me. He didn't. And for a long time after, I tried to make that mean something more complicated than it was. I told myself maybe he hadn't heard, maybe he was nervous, maybe Brittany had been having a bad day. I made up 100 small kindnesses on his behalf, the way mothers do, because the truth was harder. The truth was simpler than I wanted it to be. Every check I had written had taught Brittany that I would keep writing them. Every time I had absorbed a small cruelty without naming it, I had taught her the next cruelty would also be absorbed. And every time Mark had stayed quiet at a dinner table, I had taught him that staying quiet was a thing his mother could carry. I had been the one teaching them. That is what I had to sit with, alone, in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, not their cruelty. My instruction. That's what I mean about cause and effect. We don't get to be only the victim of how people treat us. Somewhere upstream, in some small choice we made years ago, we said yes to a thing we should have said no to. And the yes echoed. And the echo became the room we ended up standing in. What I learned that night, standing in that parking lot beside an 11-year-old Buick, is that dignity is not given to you. Nobody hands it across a counter wrapped in tissue. You decide what you will and will not pay for. You decide what your name is worth. And when you decide, you have to be willing to lose the things that depended on you not deciding. I lost a wedding I had funded. I lost the version of my son who needed me to be his bank. I lost a daughter-in-law who had never been mine in the first place. Those losses were the price of the woman I became at the kitchen table with the yellow legal pad and a cup of cold tea. Strength is not loud. I want to say that to anyone listening. The strongest thing I ever did made no sound at all. I drove home. I drank tea. I made phone calls in a quiet voice. The world thinks bravery looks like shouting. Real bravery looks like a 68-year-old woman sitting alone in her living room, watching cranes fly across a riverbank in Nebraska, deciding she is done. If you are paying for your place at someone's table, you do not have a place. You have a transaction. The day you stop paying is the day you find out the truth. And the truth, however much it costs, is the only ground you can build the rest of your life on. I am building mine now. Slowly. With watercolors and a fishing rod and a son who is learning, late, how to be a man. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is mine.